think I may have just discovered one of the biggest secrets about Game of Thrones Season 8, really about this story in and of its entirety. Now, this video is going to be extremely in-depth, and I may forget some of the things that I wanted to bring up as points, so therefore I may make a part 2. This video will contain filming spoilers for Game of Thrones Season 8, so for those of you who are faint of heart towards spoilers, click out of the video right now. For everyone else, well, you know, you're in for a treat. Before we get started, if you guys want to continue to receive content like this, make sure you subscribe, make sure you turn your notifications on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night, and also, make sure you slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be 420. Okay, so a few months back, it was confirmed that we were going to be getting a prequel series confirmed for 2020 that was going to take place during the events of the Age of Heroes. We're supposed to find out the true origins of the A Song of Ice and Fire, and mainly the beginnings of Westeros and how it was formed into what we know today. I'm super excited for that, but that got me thinking, why would they choose to focus the very first prequel series on something like that? Now, they had a little tagline, a bit of a teaser that came along with that announcement, with the stories that we think we know, and this is not verbatim, but the stories that we think we know are nonsense, and what we've been told is not the truth. So this series is going to focus on showing some of the events that take place before this series ever begins. So one thing I want to focus on in this video is the story of Azor Ahai. Now, Azor Ahai is commonly known and old by many different names, including Neferion, Yentar, Eldrick Shadow Chaser, and The Last Hero. Now, I do think that some of these names are interchangeable, and in the sense that they're talking about some of, basically they're the same people. Well, in this video, I want to propose something different. I think that the 3 heads of the dragon are 3 of those names that were mentioned. For instance, we have the prince that was promised, Azor Ahai, and then the last hero. I think there are characters who embody the reincarnations of those on the television show now. For instance, Dany is most likely the princess who was promised. Now, I know you're probably like, dude, wait a second, it's actually the prince who was promised. Well, in Essos, those are actually gender fluid, just like with the dragons. Dragons can be male or female. This prophecy can either be referring to a prince or a princess. For the most part, though, in the novels, the prince who was promised is supposed to be a reincarnation of Azor Ahai, and not the Azor Ahai. So, aside from the fact that modern day history, like in real world Earth history, there's a lot of debate between historians about what actually happened and what might have happened, the same thing happens in Westeros and in Planetos, which was actually dubbed by the fandom. We don't exactly know what happened, and hopefully this prequel series is going to shed light onto what exactly went down during these stories of legends. I am super excited to see what they come up with, but my idea rather, is that all of these names, Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, Harkoon the hero, Neferion, all of these names are just different people who stood up in different parts of the world and fought this original long night. This long night that may have traveled from Westeros across the narrow sea and into Essos. Maybe heroes from all over the world were given these names from their areas of the world that they're from. So maybe they're not in fact all referring to one person, but many different people that make up the collective idea of these are the heroes that stood up when no one else would. So if Daenerys is in fact the princess who was promised, she came to this world to save it, to save all of life with her dragons, then that would make Jon Snow Azor Ahai. Now, the history of Azor Ahai does have a little bit more knowledge behind it, more so than the princess that was promised, because that's more of like a prediction of what's to come in the future. But according to legend, Azor Ahai actually is a legendary figure in the faith of R'hllor. The Lord of Light is who they worship. Thousands of years ago, he forged a sword, Lightbringer, which he used to defeat the darkness of the Great Other. This came at a price, however, as in order to lease the sword's true powers, he had to plunge it into the heart of his loving wife, Nissa. A prophecy foretells that he will be reborn as the princess who was promised. Now, I'm about to do some super loose connectioning here, but for the most part, save your thoughts or wait to comment until I finish this next bit. Jon's journey thus far has embodied everything that Azor Ahai is known for. Jon has lost his Nissa. She literally got shot through the heart with an arrow and died in his arms. And once Ygritte died, Jon Snow went on to become Azor Ahai. He literally rose to the ranks of the Lord Commander. Then he took a bunch of soldiers to Hardhome to fight the Night King and just barely made it. A lot of the people he went with died there. Now, before we continue on with this video, just remember that everything in this story is circular by nature. Not that it's circular storytelling, but history repeats itself in ways that are insane. Just remember that. Also, remember, Jon had a very similar journey to this at the end of Season 7. Another thing that sort of adds to this theory is the fact that once Jon returned from Hardhome, he ultimately dies. And what happens during the same time frame of Jon Snow dying? Well, he does come back, but Daenerys is reborn. This is when she fully realizes that she's the princess who was promised in the form of mounting Drogon. So at the same time Jon Snow is dying over in Westeros, Daenerys is mounting a dragon, taking flight for the very first time in who knows how long this has been done, but Daenerys is doing this, becoming the princess who was promised as Jon Snow dies. So you can say that Daenerys being born in those moments is her turning into the prince that was promised, which is supposed to be a reincarnation of Azor Ahai. Before we move on to the next bit, I do want to mention that during the House of the Black and White visions in the novels that Daenerys has, she ends up seeing Rhaegar and Elia Martell during the birth of Aegon, who is an infant son. You know, he's supposed to be this Phaegon character who's roaming around pretending to be a real Targaryen descendant who's next in line for the throne in the novels. But long story short, most of us think he's fake, and the real Aegon died with having his head dashed into the wall by the mountain during Tywin Lannister's sack of King's Landing right at the end of Robert's Rebellion. But during this vision, towards the end of it, Daenerys hears Rhaegar mention that the dragon has 3 heads. And just before that, Rhaegar had mentioned that his children are going to be the prince and the princesses that were promised. So if we take this into consideration, Rhaegar's 3 heads of the dragon theory holds even more merit now. The origins of this 3 heads of the dragon theory actually dates back to Daenerys' grandsire, who's Jaehaerys II. He was told by some chick living in the woods, aka the Woods Witch, that the prince who was promised would actually come from the line of Jaehaerys through Aerys II and Rhaella, who are Daenerys' parents. And they're also Rhaegar's parents. So this is why Rhaegar grew up thinking that he himself was the actual prince who was promised until he found a scroll that told him otherwise, and this made him become a warrior. Okay, but I'm getting too caught up in Targaryen history because I love them so much. So if you guys want me to do a video just strictly on all of my favorite moments from Targaryen history, well, let me know down in the comment section and I'll cook that video up for you. But getting back on track here, this 3 heads of the prophecy, or 3 heads of the dragon, the prince that was promised, all of these things are just foreshadowing to how the final events of Season 8 will take place. So we have 3 heads of the dragon. The first being Daenerys. She is the prince or the princess who was promised, and she became who she was after Jon Snow, who is Azor Ahai, died. Jon Snow was also brought back. So there you have Jon and Daenerys being the first 2 heads of the dragon. So that leaves us with the 3rd head of the dragon. Now I think Bran is the best choice for this. Now, obviously Bran is not a Targaryen. He's not from the line of Jaehaerys II, but he is currently pseudo-possessed by a Targaryen. That Targaryen being Bloodraven. So for those of you who don't know, Bloodraven is the show's version, 3-eyed crow, whatever. For the most part, I think they're meant to be the same. So Brennan Rivers was actually an albino who had milk white skin, long white hair, and red eyes. On the right side of his face, he actually had a wine-stained birthmark which extended right up under his throat all the way up to his cheek. And this was an ink blot that was supposed to look like a raven drawn in blood. Not that this really has too much importance to this theory here, but Bloodraven's sigil is actually extremely interesting. It's a white dragon with red eyes breathing red fire on a black field. So in my opinion, this could be direct foreshadowing to one day Bran being possessed by Bloodraven, warging into a dragon, and destroying part of the army of the dead. But back on track here. Now, keeping on with the theme of each head of the dragon also having a name that was represented in times of old, like Daenerys being the princess that was promised, Jon Snow being Azor Ahai, and Bran, I think he fits mostly with the story of The Last Hero. Just for a quick reminder, The Last Hero actually went on a journey during the Long Night to seek aid or assistance from the Children of the Forest. After he went there, he lost all of his companions after they encountered wights, giants, and other. He finally reached the Children of the Forest and was able to seek their assistance. Shortly thereafter, the Night's Watch was formed. Now, I don't know about you guys, but to me, that sounds a lot like Bran's journey during Season 4. Now, he didn't end up losing Hodor, and Mira didn't leave his side until he went back to Winterfell. That didn't end up happening until later, but remember, this is history, told over thousands of years, so the events, stories, times and all that other good stuff will likely change over time. So in short, in my theory, I am saying that Jon Snow, Bran, and Daenerys are all the three heads of the dragon. Jon Snow being the embodiment of Azor Ahai, leading the armies of life, leading the armies of good to fight the armies of darkness. Then you have Bran being the last hero who has made his pact with the children of the forest, and he's gained powers that will assist everyone in this fight for the long night. And then you have Daenerys, who is the princess that was promised, that will survive this long night and make sure that there is a ruler who can pick society back up and rebuild it from the ashes. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on my interpretation of this theory down below. Now, I do think that you could swap Bran out with a few other people, one of those persons in particular being Gendry, because he does in fact hail from that line of Rhaegar, and his skills in reforging Valyrian steel may make it possible for him to give Jon Snow his Lightbringer. Now, speaking of Lightbringer, I do think that as far as the three heads of the dragon being separate entities, I do think that each one of them will have their own version of Lightbringer. Daenerys, her Lightbringer is definitely 100% Drogon. With Bran, you could argue that his ability to green see and to warg into animals is his version of Lightbringer. And for Jon, he may be the only one of these three heroes that has an actual flaming sword. If you remember, this conversation between Beric and Jon was actually extremely crucial to Season 8. In this conversation, Jon mentions to Beric that he doesn't really know what they're fighting for. The Lord of Light has spoken to Beric and has not spoken to Jon, so Jon doesn't exactly know what his purpose would be in the eyes of the Lord of Light. Well, Beric tells him maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to know exactly what it is the Lord of Light wants from us, and that we're just supposed to fight. We're soldiers here, and our side is of the living, so we fight the dead. No matter whether we lose or not, we always fight. One of the most crucial moments of that conversation, though, is when Beric mentions to Jon that they're there for a time. Now, that could mean so many different things, but for the most part, we're supposed to believe that Jon is there to fight. Once that fighting's done, what is going to be Jon's purpose? In my mind, that means that Jon Snow will be the one head of the dragon who dies. But let's debate that down below. Now, the spoiler actually is related to these flaming swords. This information was actually leaked on Reddit a few months back, and I kind of just glanced over it. I didn't really give it too much thought, and so I started researching for this video. Now, in these images, these are still images from the video, which I'm not going to play in my video for obvious reasons, but from these images, we can tell that there are three figures who are using three separate flaming swords. Now, prior to Season 7, we would immediately go, okay, that's Beric Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr, and someone else who they've given this flaming sword to. But Thoros of Myr is dead, and the last we saw Beric Dondarrion, he was at Eastwatch. The Eastwatch was taken down by the Night King of Viserion. So that really, all three of these flaming swords are up for grabs. One of them is most likely Jon Snow. I think the figure in the middle here, you can tell, is shorter than the other two, so in my mind, this gives that away to be Jon Snow. What do we know about the flaming swords and how they work? Well, so far, there's only two people that we've seen use those on the television show, both of which are followers of her lord. They're followers of the Lord of Light. You can even say that the Lord of Light flows through them. So when they light these swords, they strike them on their hand, that blood then coats the blade, and then it goes ablaze. It's very interesting in the books. The way that it's described is insane. When Beric initially lights the sword while he's fighting the Hound, it creates massive swirls of fire. They get bigger every time Beric swings the sword, so it almost looks like Beric is in a fire cage. Getting back to the scene here, now it's so blurry, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I cannot tell exactly who this is, so maybe you guys can let me know your thoughts down below, but I think these other two options are Tormund and the Hound, both of which actually fit roles of the companions who joined the last hero when he initially went to go seeking the aid of the children of the forest. Now you're probably like, dude, you just said the flaming swords are strictly associated with people who follow the Lord of Light. Well, Beric mentions to the Hound that he is one of the chosen ones of R'hllor. R'hllor has a bigger plan for him, and at an early age, he was actually touched by fire. The same with Tormund. He's a great warrior from the north, and he's actually been kissed by fire. Okay, now I know that last one was a stretch, but you guys let me know who you think these three individuals are down below in the comment section. What's most interesting to me is that the description that came along with this video wasn't very clear about who these were, but the timeline adds up to right around the same time they were wrapping up filming in Winterfell. So I think these could be Jon Snow, the Hound, and possibly Tormund, all facing off against the Night King. This could be where some of them fall, or this could be where Jon Snow dies and is successful in defeating the Night King. Alright, now this was kind of a longer one, so I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this. The like goal will be 420. Also, super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe and make sure you have your notifications turned on. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts Long Night Reviews.